What if I told you that the very thing you believe makes you a good wife, a good mother, is actually training your family to disrespect you? I know, that sounds harsh, but stay with me. Most of us operate on a logic that feels completely reasonable. If we handle everything ourselves, we're showing competence. We're showing love. If we point out what looks like laziness or carelessness, we're protecting family standards. We're motivating better behavior. It feels protective. It even feels noble. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That very logic creates the exact opposite of what we want. It creates overwhelmed wives. It creates disconnected, defensive partners. Let me introduce you to Jennifer, because her story might sound familiar. She's 38. She works in marketing for a mid-sized company in Columbus, and she manages a household with 2 kids, 8 and 10. Her husband, Mark, works in IT. He loves their children deeply, but he has what Jennifer considers a frustratingly relaxed parenting style. Jennifer prides herself on running an efficient household while maintaining a successful career. She's the kind of woman who color codes the family calendar, who keeps emergency snacks in her purse. On paper, her life looks enviable. In reality, she's drowning. Picture this. It's Tuesday evening, 6:30 p.m. Jennifer's kitchen. Homework is scattered across the counter next to permission slips that need signing. The kids? They're arguing over who gets the last juice box. Meanwhile, dinner simmers on the stove. Jennifer moves between 4 different tasks. Stirring pasta, reviewing spelling words, checking tomorrow's carpool schedule on her phone, and mentally calculating whether there's enough lunch meat for the week. Mark walks through. He glances at his phone, settles into the living room chair. This scene plays out almost every night, and it illustrates perfectly the flawed logic that creates what I call the over-functioning trap. Here's the reasoning error. That sounds so sensible. If I don't handle it, it won't get done right. And its equally destructive cousin. If I have to ask for help, it doesn't count as real help. On the surface, this logic feels protective. We think we're maintaining standards. We think we're making sure nothing falls through the cracks. But let's analyze what actually happens. When Jennifer manages everything efficiently, she's sending a crystal clear message. I've got this handled. When Mark offers assistance, and she waves him off with, "No, I'm fine," explaining would take longer. She's training him that his help isn't needed or even wanted. And then she resents him for not anticipating her needs. The efficiency seems bulletproof. Why interrupt your flow to delegate when you can finish the task in half the time? But here's the hidden cost. This reasoning creates a cycle where your very competence makes you indispensable and increasingly alone. Every time you handle something yourself to maintain quality control, you rob your partner of the opportunity to develop competence and investment in household responsibilities. You become the family's bottleneck, the only one who knows where everything goes, the only one who knows how everything works. Watch how this plays out in Jennifer's evening routine. Mark notices her stress and says, "Hey, you look stressed. Can I help with anything?" She answers automatically, "No, I'm fine. I've got it handled." But later that night, on the phone with her sister, the resentment pours out. I swear, it's like he just watches me struggle and doesn't even care. Here's the logical flaw she can't see. She has trained him that his help isn't wanted, then criticizes him for not helping. She's creating the very thing she complains about. This phenomenon is like staying late at the office every night, doing extra work, then complaining that no one appreciates your dedication, all the while refusing to delegate anything because it's easier to just do it myself. You create your own indispensability, then resent the burden. The logic feels sound in the moment, but it plants seeds of long-term problems that grow and compound over time. The vulnerability principle at work here is profound. When we handle everything ourselves to appear capable, we inadvertently train our partners to be uninvolved. True partnership requires the courage to express genuine needs and to accept imperfect help. But here's the tension. This contradicts everything we've been taught about strength and self-sufficiency. But there's an even worse side to this pattern when overfunctioning doesn't get us the appreciation we expect. We escalate to what feels like the logical next step, criticism. If quietly managing everything doesn't motivate better behavior, surely pointing out the problems will. And this is where the story gets really painful. We've become so good at appearing capable that our families genuinely don't realize we're drowning. And when we finally speak up, it's not to ask for help, it's to criticize the lack of help we never actually requested. Our communication style reflects back to us in predictable ways. Criticism breeds defensiveness. Control creates resistance. And the very strength we think we're demonstrating actually weakens our relationships by preventing the vulnerability that creates genuine connection. We've made our own exhaustion, yet we're convinced we're victims of other people's laziness. When overfunctioning doesn't bring the appreciation we expect, we escalate to what feels like the logical next step. This is where Jennifer takes a darker turn. And this is where many of us recognize our own desperate attempts to repair what we ourselves have broken. The criticism trap feels like problem solving, but it's actually problem multiplying. And the more we try to fix it through criticism, the deeper we dig ourselves into a hole without realizing we're the ones digging it. Jennifer's first attempt at getting more help seemed perfectly reasonable. She started making lists for Mark, detailed breakdowns of what needed to happen. The logic made sense. If he doesn't see what needs doing, I'll make it visible. But Mark treated these lists like suggestions, not requirements. He checked off what felt manageable and ignored the rest. And here's the hidden truth. The list was never really about task distribution. It was about her need to feel supported, to feel appreciated for carrying the mental load. So when he ignored half the list, it felt like he was ignoring half of her. Her next strategy felt even more logical. She would do everything herself, but make sure he noticed the sacrifice. Martyred sighs became her second language. She'd load the dishwasher with just enough noise to signal her overwhelm. She'd fold laundry in the living room while Mark watched television, hoping he'd notice, hoping he'd offer help. This passive communication seemed safer than direct requests. But here's the problem. Mark genuinely didn't understand. To him, the sighs, the pointed movements, they weren't cries for help. They just looked like what Jennifer always did. Busy, maybe a little stressed. but clearly handling things just as she always had. Jennifer then landed on what seemed the most logical solution: direct critique of Mark's shortcomings. If he couldn't read her signals, she'd spell it out. Mark never helps with the bedtime routine the right way, she'd tell her mother-in-law. He just lets them get away with everything. She'd complain to her friends. Her logic felt bulletproof. If you spell out the problems, people fix them. But here's the paradox. Criticism doesn't fix, it fractures. It backfires in predictable ways, producing the very opposite of what we hope for. Jennifer couldn't see the chain unfolding before her. Criticism sparks defensiveness. Defensiveness breeds withdrawal. Withdrawal piles on more work for the criticizer. More work fuels resentment. And resentment circles back as even sharper criticism. A perfect storm of escalating dysfunction, all disguised as problem solving. Hobent, Mark didn't start avoiding bedtime duties because he was lazy. He avoided them because every attempt ended the same way. In Jennifer's correction and her frustration, criticism didn't motivate him. It drained his willingness to even try. The deepest wound of the criticism trap isn't struck against the marriage. It's struck against the children, the innocents trapped between the crossfire. That night was not bedtime. It was another battle, a weary skirmish. In the war that reignited every evening, Mark had taken the assignment, bedtime commander. But upstairs, the sounds weren't of order and routine. They were battle drums of chaos. Laughter, squeals, the energy of little soldiers running free. Jennifer advanced to the doorway like a general inspecting the front line. She found her troops in pajamas, but still restless, rallied by Dad's silly voices. To her, the correction felt justified a strike to restore discipline. Mark, can you please make sure they actually brush their teeth? Last time, you just let them run the water. Mark's jaw clenched, his armor rattling. He forced a nod, his voice sharpened like steel. Fine, I said, I'll handle it. And in that instant, the war wasn't just over toothpaste and pajamas. It was a war eroding the home itself. 10 minutes later, Jennifer returned to the battlefield. The house was quiet, too quiet. She checked the front line. The children lay in bed, eyes closed, but the weapons of truth were still warm. Toothbrushes, damp from water, yet their bristles untouched by toothpaste. A silent trail of evidence, like smoke after cannon fire. Jennifer seized them, lifting the brushes high like exhibits in a courtroom. Her voice cut through the air, sharp as a prosecutor's blade. See? They didn't even use toothpaste. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Mark's reply crashed back like a slammed door in a fortress wall. You know what? Then you just do it. Without another glance, he withdrew from the battlefield, descending the stairs, leaving silence and smoke in his wake. And there she stood, a lone soldier, abandoned on the field, trapped in the very nightmare she had sworn to avoid, alone, seething with resentment, left with the nightly duties she had fought so hard not to shoulder. The bitter truth loomed like the ruins after war. This defeat was not imposed upon her. She had scripted it herself, weapon by weapon, word by word. The fatal flaw in this battle was blinding. Jennifer had fixed her aim on the toothpaste, a trivial detail, while missing the quiet miracle already secured. The enemy of bedtime had retreated. The children had laughed with their father, marched into pajamas, and surrendered to bed without resistance. It was a victory, but instead of savoring it, Jennifer dismantled it piece by piece, like a general who burns her own city after the war is won. Her criticism was no stray bullet. It was a cannon blast that levelled Mark's resolve, extinguishing the fire that made him try at all. And in that smoky silence, her children absorbed a lesson deeper than words. Dad's efforts will never measure up to Mom's standards. However, in chasing the wrong target, she wasn't just missing the point. She was planting the landmines of tomorrow's battle. The turning point for Jennifer came at something as ordinary as school pickup. Another mom said, "My kids always talk about how much fun your husband is. They think your children are lucky." Then she added, almost casually, "You probably never criticize the way he parents in front of them, right?" Jennifer froze. In that instant, she saw it clearly. Her own 8-year-old had started rolling her eyes at Dad mirroring Jennifer's exasperated tone. It was a wake-up call. Her criticism wasn't just shutting down Mark, it was teaching the kids to do the same. And that moment changed everything. Jennifer had to face an uncomfortable truth. She'd been like a restaurant critic, showing up to every family meal with a clipboard, jotting down notes instead of enjoying dinner. No wonder nobody wanted to cook when the critic was at the table. Her criticism didn't make anyone better. It just made them nervous, defensive, and less likely to try. One night, Mark put down the spatula and sighed. "Cooking for you is like auditioning for a cooking show," he said. "Except the judge is my wife. And she doesn't clap." Jennifer blinked. "Wait, you mean I make you feel like a contestant?" He raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's just say I'm still waiting for my golden buzzer. You and one..." The truth stung. But it was also funny and impossible to ignore. A sinking feeling hit her as she overheard her 10-year-old son talking to a friend. "My dad's okay," he said, "but my mom says he's lazy and doesn't help enough." Her stomach dropped. Her own child was now seeing his father through her critical lens, repeating her complaints as if they were facts rather than expressions of her own frustration. She had inadvertently taught her children to doubt and disrespect someone they naturally adored, and the weight of that realization was crushing. This is when the mirror effect became impossible to ignore. Jennifer wasn't the victim of Mark's laziness. She had built the very patterns she complained about. Her words had made Mark defensive and withdrawn, and each critique only pushed him further away. The cycle fed itself, a loop of mutual resentment. Even more painfully, her children were learning the same lesson. Dad wasn't quite good enough. She had been so focused on being right that she forgot the real goal, creating a loving, supportive family. On a quiet Sunday morning, Jennifer sat with her coffee, watching Mark make pancakes with the kids. They were laughing. Flour dusted the counters, the kitchen a beautiful disaster. Her first instinct? Jump in, offer guidance, correct the measurements, clean up the mess. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion from all the little battles. Maybe it was the pure joy on her children's faces. So she stayed seated and just watched. And in that moment of non-interference, Jennifer saw something remarkable. Her family functioning perfectly well, without her management. It was humbling and freeing. Dignified communication creates dignified responses. When we offer respect, we preserve our own dignity and invite cooperation instead of defensiveness. It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But its impact? Revolutionary. Jennifer realized she'd been operating under a huge misunderstanding about influence. She used to believe criticism was fuel, that it would push people to do better. The truth? Criticism doesn't fuel, it drains. It doesn't inspire improvement. It inspires avoidance. She thought taking charge made her strong. But really, it broadcasted only one message. I don't trust you to handle this. One evening, Jennifer caught herself just about to correct Mark loading the dishwasher. But she stopped. He looked at her and joked, "What, no performance review this time?" Jennifer laughed, a little embarrassed. "I'm under new management." In that moment, everything shifted. She stopped trying to change Mark through criticism. Instead, she created the space for him to contribute, and for the first time, his help actually mattered. No evaluations, no judgment, just participation. Her first experiment felt almost too simple, and that's what made it terrifying. That evening, instead of powering through dinner prep alone while silently resenting the lack of help, Jennifer tried something new. When Mark walked into the kitchen, she looked up from chopping vegetables and said, "Hey, I'd love some help getting dinner ready. Could you handle the salad?" His reaction was instant and surprisingly warm. "Sure, absolutely," he said, already heading for the fridge like a man on a mission. No defensiveness, no excuses, just willing engagement. Later, as they all sat down to eat, Jennifer noticed something curious. The kids were actually eating more greens than usual. She smiled and said, "Thanks for making that salad, Mark. The kids ate way more vegetables tonight." Mark looked almost comically surprised. "Really? I didn't do anything fancy, just opened a bag of lettuce and dumped it in a bowl." Jennifer laughed. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. I appreciate it." The cause and effect difference between these two approaches was striking once Jennifer noticed it. Here's the old pattern. She made a demand. That triggered defensiveness. Poor performance followed. More criticism erupted. And finally, Mark retreated to the couch, like it was his safe zone. Now, the new pattern, she made a respectful request. That encouraged genuine engagement. His natural competence emerged. Gratitude followed. And suddenly, everyone was more involved, Mark included. The contrast was night and day. Jennifer realized that people rise to meet respect, but shrink away from criticism. For the first time in years, the mirror effect was finally working in her favor. But here's the tricky part. Changing old communication habits means bumping into some pretty uncomfortable contradictions. At first, Jennifer's brain threw up all kinds of reasonable objections, like this one. "But what if he doesn't do it right?" Logical answer? Well, nobody gets better without practice. Competence grows through trying, not through being criticized. If you micromanage the method, you usually sabotage the outcome. Another objection was, "Okay, but what if he doesn't help unless I specifically ask?" Fair question, right? But here's the truth Jennifer had to learn. Partnership grows through clear communication, not through secret telepathy. Expecting your partner to magically read your mind is just a recipe for disappointment wrapped up as some kind of relationship standard. Or, as Jennifer later joked, "Turns out my husband wasn't broken, he just wasn't psychic." The most challenging objection was, "What if this makes me look weak?" This fear runs deep for many accomplished women because we've been taught that vulnerability equals weakness and independence equals strength. But Jennifer discovered the opposite was true. Vulnerability creates connection. When she started expressing genuine needs instead of handling everything herself, Mark didn't see weakness. He saw opportunities to be useful and appreciated. The children didn't lose respect for Mom's capabilities. They gained respect for Dad's contributions. Jennifer began implementing what she called her dignity revolution. Instead of criticizing Mark's parenting, she started pointing out what was working. The kids always laugh so hard when you help with baths replaced. You're making too much noise up there. Instead of doing everything herself and then complaining about the lack of appreciation, she started asking for specific help using vulnerable language. I'd love help with the grocery run this weekend. It felt scary to say, but it created immediate partnership instead of solo resentment. The change happened almost instantly, and looking back, it made perfect sense. Mark began offering help without being asked, because helping now felt pleasant instead of risky. The kids no longer heard constant critiques of their dad. Family dinners became more relaxed, since Jennifer stopped acting like the quality control manager and simply joined in as a mom. She realized her exhaustion wasn't just about the workload. It came from staying stuck in a critical, controlling stance that drained her energy and everyone else's motivation. The applications are simple but powerful. First, trade one criticism for one appreciation each day. Catch your partner doing something right. Second, make vulnerable requests. I'd love help with creates connection, while you never only creates walls. Third, shift family conversations to what's working, not what's broken. Fourth, delegate 3 tasks fully. No micromanaging, no correcting. And finally, protect your partner's bond with the kids. Never criticize their parenting in front of them. The obstacles to this approach are predictable and totally surmountable. But what if he doesn't do it to my standards? Different doesn't mean wrong. Perfectionism kills partnership. What if it doesn't work right away? Patterns built over years don't vanish overnight. But here's the good news. Respect creates respect. Much faster than criticism ever creates compliance. What if I'm just enabling laziness? What you're doing is creating the conditions for voluntary contribution. And voluntary contribution always outlasts forced effort. Jennifer realized she'd been like a GPS that only announced wrong turns. Recalculating. You missed the exit. Turn around immediately. That was her communication style. And no wonder everyone in the car felt criticized and defensive. But when she started focusing on the route forward, instead of the mistakes behind them, the whole family finally began moving in the same direction. 6 months later, Jennifer's family looks completely different. Not because Mark became a different man, but because she stopped trying to reprogram him and started creating the respectful dynamic she longed for. She went from exhausted to supported, not by carrying less weight, but by speaking about that weight in a new way. And here's the truth. Respect creates respect. Appreciation creates appreciation. Dignity creates dignity. So ask yourself, what would happen if tonight, instead of pointing out what's wrong, you notice just one thing that's right? What would happen if you asked with vulnerability instead of demanding with frustration? Your family is waiting for you to see them through the lens of possibility instead of the lens of problems. The question isn't whether your partner will respond. They will. The real question is, are you brave enough to start?